Okay, too many talks here today. Okay. So this SWG is evaluation and diagnostics. We we are doing the activities like to help to describe, document, and understand the performance of integrated assessment models, which can eventually contribute to improve model performance and reliability. And furthermore, we are making a recommendation in the areas of priorities for community activities and standards of best practice. And some of you may notice we conducted a survey to the individual monitoring teams, and we've asked something like whether you have a documentations or wiki-based documentations or validations or whatever you have related to this validation or documentations that can be specified in the survey. And we've asked for one to two PowerPoint slides to summarize what you have. Actually, we got more slides from some teams. And we're gonna discuss based on that survey. And yeah, the primary question or why this is important is that we need to conduct our research using best scientific practice, and that's how knowledge accumulates. And we've been accused of just making it up. It's a belief held by many physical scientists over our work. And so I think we need to work a bit more to advance the current status of integrated assessment model. And our results should be, reproducible and based on methods and model validity. And so, as I said, we collected the responses, and here we have a list of 13 responses. It's good. And we will be discussing based on the surveys, and we may ask to you, those who submitted the responses, to briefly show what you have now regarding the diagnostics and validations. Yes, so that's all. Thank you.
This used to be one of the most active working groups within the IAMC when we developed the RCPs and the SSPs. It's now a little bit more quiet working group, but we had some important activities going on. So I just wanted to report a few things that we have achieved with the SSPs. And so first of all, the SSPs are now clearly used in the IPCC as we intended. They are also really used in the scientific community. And we see the SSPs, for instance, in the special report on 1.5, we clearly saw them being used in the way that we intended in the land report, as presented by Kate, where we not only using the dimension of the climate, but they're also using the dimension of the socioeconomic development. Now one activity that we are involved in is in the cross scenario working group of the IPCC. It's led by Jan Fuglesvet. That scenario working group is trying to coordinate scenario use among the different working groups of IPCC. For instance, it's trying to ensure that scenarios are available for working group 1 to be used, but it also tries to ensure that small climate models can be used by us to combine our scenarios and then also calculate climate impacts. Now, Brian yesterday already presented how the SSPs have gone into the scientific literature, representing about 600 scenarios that were collected, 600 papers that were collected that have been using the SSPs and the RCPs. I also did some Scopus research where I not only searched for SSPs but also for RCPs. And so the search terms were RCPs and scenario and SSP and scenarios. And actually you, in that Scopus, quick Scopus search, you already find 3,500 documents, papers that are published. And clearly there's also a huge increase. So over time, so clearly there's something wrong with my search term because I also have some papers published before the RCPs were published. But since then you see really the things taking off. Something to note is that if you do it this way, the most important things you pick up are the publications of the climate modeling community. Yeah? Because here you see that the journals that were mostly publishing the SSPs, RCP papers. And so you see the Journal of Climate, for instance, being really important, and climate dynamics. So these are climate work journal papers, but also climatic change, for instance, being in there, which is much more an integrated community, integrated science community, but also and science of the total environment, which is more on the socioeconomic side. And so we see that different journals are picking up SSPs and RCPs. This is also the type of topics that these papers are handling, and again, Earth and planetary sciences, this is the climate modeling community, but also environmental sciences, this is broader, integrated, and also, for instance, and that's also already in Brian's presentation, you see that in the agricultural community, there's a lot of use of the SSPs. So this is good news, so people are picking up our work. So, also presented by Brian already on Monday, it's time to start thinking of how do we go to a next phase? And this can be with different aspects. So first of all, population and GDP assumptions that are behind the SSPs, at some point we have to say these are not up to date anymore. For instance, you can already see that, for instance, our economic assumptions for Africa were pretty okay when we developed the scenarios in 2015, but now they're somewhat on the high side given the development, what's happening. And so some of our users that find it really important that this data is also up to date in the short term might have an interest in us updating those drivers. And then we have to think of a process how to do that. Individual teams can easily do it, but do we also do it as a community? And if so, at what point do we endorse this as a community and say this is actually a better representation right now than the old scenarios? How do we make sure that the link between the working group 1 scenarios that were run and the new updated scenarios remains credible? That people still believe that they can use the working group 1 output in combination with potential updates. But this is the relatively easy part of that update, because at some point you also have to start thinking about the narratives. Are the narratives still credible? And then there is also going to be extensions, and there we also have to start. That's the next slide. So one aspect of our working group is also collecting data and collecting new scenarios, making sure that there are these scenarios are available. Bas will present more of that in his presentation soon. But in principle, we're interested in global modeling scenarios, in national scenarios, in sectoral scenarios. We're now collecting them mostly as part of an IPCC database hosted at the IPCC, but done within the context of the IAMC. And so the question is, to all the teams, submit your scenarios into this database. It's really useful. Then, so something that we have to start thinking about, and that's connected to my previous remark about updates. So how, if we are going to update, how do we ensure the review and especially also the formalization of some of the work that is going on. So for instance, if you think of extensions, so people are publishing things on governance in relation to SSPs, or potentially conflicts in relation to SSPs. And those papers might be interesting for others to use. So if somebody is working on impact modeling, and there are multiple papers that have tried to interpret governance in the context of the SSPs, at some point it might be useful if we say, okay, if you're going to use one of those, and maybe this one is the most appropriate to use, so you keep somehow the science connected. And that is obviously a sensitive issue because there are multiple papers, and so we have to start thinking of a process how to do so, while on the one hand indicating that there might be a preference to use a certain paper, and at the same time ensuring that all the other papers that were published also receive a sufficient limelight. And so this is something that probably our working group has to start working, going towards, how to organize such a process. And that's what I wanted to share on the progress of our working group. We will have a session like all the other working groups this afternoon, so feel free to come and we will be discussing some of these issues.
So this one is on the SWG on scenarios for climate-related financial analysis, and I would like to start by giving you a short history about the recent years, because in recent years our community has been more and more actively engaged with the finance community, and it started kind of with the so-called TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which was an initiative by the finance sector to look into the topic of better assessing climate risk for their assets and also for companies that they would be investing in. And this TCFD came up with a report and a set of recommendations for climate-related financial disclosures in 2017. And among those recommendations was the use of climate change scenarios to better understand physical risks, so the risk of climate change on companies, as well as transition risk, which is the risk of climate policy on companies. And this has sparked within the sector a lot of activities to think about, conceptualize, pilot and apply those scenarios for these financial risk analysis. And the question is, of course, how can it be done and where do we get the scenarios from? And our community, the IAM community, was quickly recognized as an important community to provide such scenarios. So there were workshops on this, for example, an important one in 2017 at the Bank of England. And we have been in connection with the Bank of England already since late 2016 when representatives actually came to our IMC meeting, and since then we have been in touch about this. So in recent years there were many activities going on. I'll just give you 3 examples here. One is a collaboration that YASA and WEYANT did together with Oliver Wyman, that's a consultancy in the finance sector, within a pilot organized by the UNEP Finance Initiative to try to do first steps in using 2-degree scenarios by banks for their financial risk assessment. Then MIT did a report preceded by a workshop on the use of climate scenarios in corporate disclosure, so directly on the same topic. And they came out with this report in this year, I think. And then Steve Rose and Jay Edmonds ran a workshop in Snowmass this summer also on the topic of global scenario and other science issues and opportunities for climate-related finance, investment, and transition risk assessment. Very long title, very all-encompassing. It was also a very broad discussion, I think, there. So that's just examples of activities. There were many more activities, many more meetings. And right now, another important player in this field that is important to to know about is the so-called Network for Greening the Financial System. That's an collaboration of regulators and central banks that are really thinking of using or of recommending guidelines for the use of scenarios for these financial risk disclosures. And we are in touch with them. There were meetings at the central banks of Mexico, England, and Spain over the course of the year where we presented our work. And finally, given all this activity, we decided in spring to found this SWG on finance. We have been discussing this before, but now it's officially founded. So we have a mission statement. You can go on the website and read the mission statement. And it's very broadly saying, facilitate the discussion of the potential use and development of IAM scenarios for the finance sector. And there are two purposes, or maybe three purposes of that. One is the assessment of financial risk, both physical risk and transition risk. That's the one I talked about, but there's also, of course, the big question of alignment with long-term goals and informing about the potential role of finance in transition pathways. So all this is done by recognizing that there's a wide range of potential users. So within the finance sectors, we have private banks, insurers, asset managers, rating agencies. They are all interested in this work. We do have also real economy companies like from the oil and gas sector and so on that are also looking at this process. And then there are financial regulators and central banks that I just mentioned, but there's also development banks and governments. They all can be interested in this type of connection with us. Planned activities of this SWG very broadly. First, just an information exchange platform. Let's learn from each other what we are actually doing in this area. Then facilitate dialogue within our community, how to advance the science and the appropriate use of scenarios for climate-related financial analysis, a number of questions there. And also facilitate and support dialogue between our community and the finance sector. And if that it is useful, the SWG could also serve as in a coordinating function on things like archival documentation and communication of scenario data. So that's broadly the type of activities. And with that, let me just give you a teaser of the session this afternoon, in the second late afternoon. So we will discuss the proposed scenario set up by the NGFS and learn about the activities they are doing. We're happy to have a keynote remotely by Ryan Barrett from the Bank of England on this. And then let's have a healthy discussion about particularly the scenario framework that they see, and that was presented on the first day by the Chief Sustainable Finance Officer of Japan. So with that, please come to our session. Thanks.
Yes. So the working group on data protocols and management today, Behnam and I are stepping in for Kate Kelvin and Volker K, who are both not here. And as a not so routine working group chair, I don't have slides on the background of what we actually do in this working group. But building on what Detlef just said, in the collection of scenarios, this working group is about the tools and to work with and the frameworks and the methods to collect and compare our information, and the content of all these things is basically what we and you all produce as community, right? So enabling us to function as a community is basically very much what this working group does. So for this afternoon on the agenda, we have two items to discuss. One, a proposal for guidelines from the IAMC on policy protocols. I'll go into it in a minute. And then spatial and temporal expansions of the IAMC format, and then anything else that people would want to bring up. On the first topic, the issue here is that we have now sort of a spreading fire of different policy baselines and best practices baselines where people define different policies and ask modelers to implement them, and all these policies come in very different descriptions and very different formats, which starts to annoy many of us when working with the models. And so we are going to discuss actually whether there's a role for the IAMC here to develop a joint formatting, building on experiences in other disciplines to sort of structure how we deal with this side of the inputs to the models, from policy to inputs of models. Then on the extension, I'm going to mention those here. We're going to do it a little bit more elaborate this afternoon, but expecting that many of you might not be there this afternoon, and this is important for you to see, that there is in the works, because all of you who work with the IAMC template on your output side, there is now in the works, I'm not completely sure actually on the status of it, whether you, if you submit now already to the database, you can use this, or whether this is coming soon. There is now, for spatial extensions, we are adding the ability for trait reporting in the templates. And we do this by adding this new delimiter character, the well, basically the larger than character, in the middle of two regions. And so you see that here in the middle. So if you do in Africa, 2W, to Western Europe trait, you can represent trait flows in your in the template. And similarly, there's now an addition coming to actually do a temporal extension to go to sub-annual timescales. And so this can be anything from weekly to monthly to hourly. And you do this by adding here a sub-annual, yeah, okay, that's highlighting as well. So you have a year, and then there is a sub-annual time step. Here, in the case of hours, you need to add up, if you want to report all of the hours in the year, the 8,007. This is going to add up to many, many different lines that actually will add to your reporting file, which then also immediately brings the practical consideration here that Excel doesn't allow you to endlessly keep expanding your files. And so for very large data sets, if you want to do this for hourly data sets, we need to really think about alternative submission formats. But for now, I think we are still we're still doing fine with quarterly or rougher timescales. Good. So that's what I have to say on the working group. And then we move into the presentation on the database, on what we have actually existing and working on the databases.